Hello, my name is Aidan Ruppert, alongside me Rob Murray, and welcome to episode 4 of the WCHC Sports Podcast, where we discuss the latest news and updates from around the sports world. Whether you're one of our few devoted fans or you're listening for the first time, be sure to subscribe to our WCHC Sports 88.1 FM YouTube page, where you can expect weekly updates on all things sports. Today, Rob and I will be talking about Boston Bruins goalkeeper Tuukka Rask's decision to opt out of the Stanley Cup playoffs, Donovan Mitchell's historic scoring output in Game 1, Fernando Tatis Jr. and the unwritten rules of baseball, and more. Rob, I'm not sure what your week was like, but I spent just about all of mine in front of the TV watching the playoffs.
Yeah, I can't say my week was any different in the past 7 days. Continued to deliver great playoff matchups, both in the NBA and the NHL, as well as another heated storyline coming out of Major League Baseball that for once did not involve the Houston Astros. And I can't wait to get started, but before we jump into today's discussion, do you, the listener, have something that you'd like to hear Aidan and I talk about during next week's podcast? If so, leave your name and suggested topic in the comments below, or email wchcsports@g.holycross.edu. We would love to hear from you.
Rob, you and I have gotten so used to starting things off talking about the NBA in the podcast, so I thought we could really shake things up today. And let's talk NHL, as the Stanley Cup playoffs are really starting to heat up, with most first-round series either wrapped up or wrapping up really soon. And interestingly, we did not see a single 4-0 sweep in any of the 8 first-round matchups, though we did witness a few 4-1 gentlemen's sweeps from the Islanders, Golden Knights, Avalanche, Lightning, and Bruins. And I'd like to spend a few minutes on that last team, Boston, as the other teams that won their series so convincingly, they were some of the league's top seeds, whereas the Boston Bruins easily overcame the number 5 seed Hurricanes as a 4 seed themselves. After the series was tied 1-1, Boston picked up 3 straight victories to advance behind some impressive team performances, including most notably a 6:51 span towards the end of Game 4, in which Boston scored 4 goals. It seemed that the Bruins had finally regained their rhythm, Rob, but now we come to find out that they will be missing a vital piece of their team for the rest of the playoff run.
That's right, and I think the Bruins are finally playing like that 1 seed they were right before the NHL lockdown. They really dismantled the Carolina team that I thought had the potential to make a really great series. But after Game 2, in which they lost in their best of 7 against the Hurricanes, their goaltender Tuukka Rask informed the team of his decision to opt out of the remainder of the playoffs, citing concerns over a recent medical emergency involving one of his 3 daughters. And while this is something I think that every good parent would do, in temporarily stepping away from the game to care for their child, it seems like the Bruins have really had no problem keeping their stride in the absence of their star goaltender. They won 3 straight victories after he left behind their new starter, Yaroslav Halak, and they find themselves in the second round awaiting what is likely to be the Tampa Bay Lightning. Now, I believe Boston has proven, like I said before, they remain the class of the East. Carolina was a very strong team, and they dispatched them, took care of them in 5 short games. And I felt like the series had the potential to go the distance and even groom the eventual winner for a deep playoff run. And a deep playoff run now seems like a very real possibility for the Bruins, just 1 week after they looked terrible and went 0-3 in the round-robin stage.
Yeah, they've definitely sort of begun the process of righting the ship, as they were, as you mentioned, the class of that conference. And certainly our thoughts and prayers are with Tuukka and his family, but it will really be interesting to see where Boston goes from here. Many around the league aren't quite as sold on Tuukka as they were just a year or 2 ago, but let's not forget some of the performances he put together during the Bruins' run to the Stanley Cup final last season. And although Boston wasn't able to close things out in a 7-game series, I think that you'd have a hard time arguing they'd even make it that far without some of his brilliant play in the postseason. And in my opinion, actually, it's funny, the Bruins are sort of facing a problem similar to their friends, the Boston Celtics, who just recently lost Gordon Hayward to an ankle injury for at least the next few weeks. So it's sort of a situation where the Bruins, can they win without Tuukka? Yeah, they probably can, and they've already sort of started to prove that. But it's only going to make things harder for them in the long run. And it's going to take quite a collective effort from some of their other star players just to sort of survive and advance. But enough about the Bruins, because believe it or not, sports do exist outside of Boston. So walk me through, Rob, some of these other series and what you have seen out there on the ice.
Sure thing, Aidan. Out in Edmonton, Alberta, where we have the Western Conference bubble, the Vegas Golden Knights and Colorado Avalanche, as you mentioned earlier, had some nice gentlemen sweeps after their success in the round robin format. They took care of the 8th-seeded Chicago Blackhawks and the 7th-seeded Arizona Coyotes, respectively. The Knights are 7-1 since the start of the bubble, and the Colorado Avalanche have come up a series in which they had a 14-goal differential, including back-to-back 7-1 wins against the Coyotes. So both of these teams right now appear destined to meet in the Western Conference Finals, with some of these other squads like the Canucks and the Blues fighting for their playoff lives in round one. And meanwhile, in Toronto, where you have the Eastern Conference bubble, the Bruins aren't the only team that look like a very strong contender in this year's postseason. Emerging as not only a great story, but a bit of a dark horse, the 6th-seeded New York Islanders are 7-2 in the bubble and made quick work of Alex Ovechkin and the Capitals again in 5 games. They have a very solid defensive core, and they really used it to stifle one of the greatest scorers we've seen in our generation in Alex Ovechkin in that series. And on top of the Islanders, the Tampa Bay Lightning continued their momentum from the round robin. They beat the Columbus Blue Jackets 4-1, exacting their revenge in some way, as the Blue Jackets swept them as the 8th seed in last year's playoffs. It was a really hard-fought 5 games between the two teams. 4 of them were decided by just 1 goal. In fact, we've seen 24 one-goal games as of this Friday, highlighting the ultimate levels of parity present amidst this year's unique set of circumstances. And Aidan, you always know the action is going to get better into these later rounds, and we'll see. We might be lucky enough to see a Game 7 or 2 with these Blues, Canucks, and Flyers Canadian series looking to finish up this weekend.
Yeah, Rob, I really do hope it goes 7, because no matter the circumstances or what's going on in the world right now, a Game 7 is still a Game 7, and I would very much be looking forward to it, even as someone who's not a huge hockey fan myself. Do you ever find yourself thinking about sports while perusing emails pertaining to Popcorn Tuesdays? Do your friends ever complain that all you talk about is sports? Most importantly, do you strongly feel that the Las Vegas Aces have committed the blunder of the century in recently waiving former Holy Cross forward Lauren Manis? If your answer is yes to any of these questions, WCHC Sports has a place for you. For information on opportunities to broadcast, podcast, and everything in between, email wchcsports@g.holycross.edu today. So as I mentioned earlier, I have been absolutely glued to my TV watching these NBA playoffs so far. And even as a diehard basketball fan, I had my doubts about what these games were going to look like without fans in terms of replicating sort of that playoff intensity and atmosphere. But I got to say, I can hardly tell the difference. And that's not to say it's not profoundly different for the players. Many players, in fact, have spoken to just how different the atmosphere is in Orlando without the fans in the arena. But to me, the playoffs this year have been as entertaining as they've ever been, and certain individuals are part of the reason why. So, Rob, let's start with Donovan Mitchell. 57 points in Game 1. Were you able to catch the game or any of the highlights?
Yeah, Aidan, I wasn't able to catch the game, but I would have been a fool to not at least see the highlights from Donovan Mitchell's all-time performance. He was lights out from pretty much everywhere on the court. He had supreme confidence, wire to wire, in terms of shooting the basketball. And it ironically came against a team that selected him and subsequently traded him on draft day, which I'm sure felt very good for Donovan Mitchell. His 57 points on 19 of 33 shooting and 6 of 15 from three-point range was the 3rd most points in a playoff game ever, behind Michael Jordan's 63 against Larry Bird's Celtics in 1986 and Elgin Baylor's 61 points in the 1962 NBA Finals against Bill Russell's Boston team. And since 2000, only Allen Iverson had put up 55 in a playoff game back in 2003. So this is certainly elite company for Donovan Mitchell, and a performance he hopes to repeat even a fraction of against the Nuggets over these next few games, as that series is currently tied at 1.
Yeah, definitely. And the 57 points on the 19 of 33 shooting, that efficiency is just off the charts. It was big time
Crazy.
for him.
Crazy.
And you mentioned Jordan 63, and I think that this game from Donovan Mitchell has MJ written all over it. As you might recall, we haven't even mentioned the Jazz actually lost this game 1. And though Mitchell and the Jazz did respond with quite a convincing victory wire to wire in game 2, but still, it's got to be real difficult to carry your team like that, only to have Jamal Murray absolutely crush you shot after shot in the fourth quarter and overtime, as he was hitting shots just as impressive as Mitchell's, if not more so. And, Mitchell sort of disappeared in overtime a little bit, and it was Jamal Murray that had the last laugh. But speaking of Donovan Mitchell, I want to get your take on this, because even before the 57-point game last week, people have been looking at him for a little over a year now and saying that he could be the next Dwayne Wade. And isn't it a little soon for that? Because let's not forget what Wade did during his third year in the league, as he walked away with the 2006 Finals MVP, albeit with a slightly more talented Miami Heat team.
I do think it's a little premature to start bestowing a Hall of Fame career path onto Donovan Mitchell. For as much as he's done across his first 3 years, he's been phenomenal. But another thing we can't forget is that many see Dwayne Wade as a top 5 or even top 3 shooting guard of all time, only paling in comparison to the likes of the late Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan. So long story short, this is going to be a very tough act for Mitchell to follow. But I do understand where this likening Dwayne Wade is coming from in terms of his skill set and the role he has on the Utah Jazz. Mitchell is an incredibly explosive player with a very solid mid-range jumper to keep defenses honest, like Dwayne Wade had been known for across his storied career. And the two stars' career paths started very similar as well, both of them coming out of Midwest schools like Marquette and Louisville, to make an instant impact on their respective squads. And I think the silver lining for Mitchell through all of this is that he's on pace to be a much better three-point shooter than Wade ever was, shooting a career 36% from deep compared to Wade's 29%. And in fact, through just 3 seasons, Mitchell has made one less three-pointer than Wade did during his entire career. So the man they call Spida Mitchell is well on his way to smash that mark, and he will certainly have something to say about his legacy that the great Dwayne Wade ultimately cannot.
Yeah, that's a great point on the three-point shooting. I think it was maybe the 2011-12 lockout season. I just remember watching Dwayne Wade, and it was crazy. For a good stretch of games there to start, he refused to shoot a three-pointer a la Ben Simmons and sort of what we have seen from him historically. But he did pick up the shooting late in his career. But it is great for Mitchell that he sort of has that in his bag early on. And really, you're right about the Midwestern schools. The similarities don't end there. Mitchell's only 6'1", listed at 6'1", to Dwayne Wade 6'4", but both of them at the two-guard position, they have extremely long arms with 6'9" and 6'10" wingspans respectively. So definitely they're explosive scorers, and I think they both really Dwayne Wade, as we know, he was one heck of a playmaker, not only a scorer, and I think Mitchell's starting to get there. And that's what sort of brings me to my next point that I'm just going to present real quick. I'm not sold on Donovan Mitchell alongside Rudy Gobert, and here's why. Donovan Mitchell has really come so far, as mentioned, as a playmaker, and I think that he can honestly be a 28, 7-7 guy in this league, and he's not quite there yet. But I think that as decent of a shooter as Mitchell already is, his bread and butter is getting to the rim, and I think that you need floor spacing for that, and that's not something that Rudy Gobert really brings to your team. Gobert is a defensive player of the year. I think he's just as indispensable as Mitchell, but in terms of the fit between those two, I think that if you have Donovan Mitchell, you know, driving to the hoop and then you suddenly kick it out to Gobert 30 feet out, he doesn't know what to do with it there. And that's not a knock against him. He's historically one of the best defensive players we have ever seen in this league, but I'm just not sure if the two can coexist. Although, we talked about that 2006 Miami team, and Dwayne Wade did win with a 33-year-old Shaquille O'Neal beside him. So it's interesting to see how that will play out.
Absolutely. I do think in today's NBA especially, you need a legitimate second option to help with the scoring load. You see the Lakers with LeBron and AD. You see the Bucks with Giannis and Chris Middleton, although I do have a couple problems with Chris Middleton that I'll get into later. But Rudy Gobert is not the guy who you want taking a shot after Donovan Mitchell. Defensive prowess aside, he's been phenomenal and he anchors that Utah Jazz defense. But if the Jazz really want to get into that upper echelon of the West and kind of posit themselves as true contenders in that loaded conference, Donovan Mitchell's going to need some more help outside of Rudy Gobert and Joe Ingles and Mike Conley. They need a more dynamic scorer who can really just put the ball in his hands and get to the rim at whatever cost.
Yeah, that's a great point. Even though Mike Conley has yet to play a playoff game, he should be, I think, returning for game 3 or 4. They're also missing Bogdanovich, who's a 20-point-per-game guy. But even with those guys back, no, I wouldn't see them making too much noise in the Western Conference this year or next. I think that they do need a more dynamic player, maybe in the backcourt alongside Donovan Mitchell. And so I will ask you one last question. Do you think that the Jazz do have any shot against Denver? They did have an impressive response in the series at 1-1. I think Denver has too much firepower, but I just want to get your take on that.
Well, if we wanted to talk about players to put alongside Donovan Mitchell, I think Giannis 2021 for the Jazz would be a possibility. I'm just kidding. That'll never happen. But in terms of the Denver series, I still like them in 5, maybe 6 games. I think the Jazz have shown a little bit of fight across the first 2 contests. Whenever you get 57 points out of anyone, you should be winning that game. The Jazz have a real legitimate case to be up 2-0 in this series, so I'm not going to count them out completely. They're a team like the Pacers, I think, who maybe kind of underwritten and underappreciated whenever they play a series, but they're still able to make it competitive. So I'll say Denver in 6 for the time being.
I'm with you on that. We will see how it plays out.
So moving on, Aidan, I know you're not the most avid follower of Major League Baseball, but I think even the casual observer has noticed multiple instances of tensions boiling over between certain players and teams, the Astros. But this past week, Houston, nor any team exposed to COVID-19, was not at the center of baseball's latest controversy. Instead, it was San Diego Padres shortstop Fernando Tatis Jr. hitting a grand slam in the 8th inning of a Monday night contest against the Texas Rangers. And what should have been a normal home run ball from one of the game's brightest stars was quickly warped into somewhat of an attack on baseball's age-old traditions. Tatis's grand slam came during a 10-3 Padres lead and a 3-0 count, which did not sit particularly well with the Rangers bench, who had some choice words for Tatis as he approached home plate. They thought he was running up the score, and this is an opinion that was shared among some in the baseball community, but was mostly met with criticism, especially by fellow players and younger fans of the game. So that being said, Aidan, I'd like to know what you think about the incident. Were the Rangers justified in their frustration, or was Tatis simply doing what he could to help the team?
Rob, I do have some mixed feelings on this, and there is a whole lot to dissect here. First, let me just say that I do understand and appreciate the whole unwritten rule thing in sports. I really do. Is it stupid? Yeah, it's pretty stupid. But I say that because you're taught all your life as a young athlete to sort of keep your foot on the gas at all times and to give it your all until the referee rings the bell, until the horn sounds, whatever. But at the same time, I do get that this is the way that things have always been, and that some are going to inevitably take offense to Tatis swinging for the fences on a 3-0 count. But let me put it this way. Say you and I are playing Wii Baseball and you are just working me up 10-3, just like in this game Monday night. If you smack one out of the park on me and I smash my controller or Wii remote into the TV screen just due to sheer rage, who's the real idiot here? Aren't I at least partially accountable for putting myself in that kind of position, a 10-3 deficit in the first place? So who am I to tell you that you can't play your game, especially when a 10-3 lead in the eighth inning? It's not insurmountable for all intents and purposes. Is it unlikely that they were going to come back? Yeah, definitely. But if I'm the Rangers in that situation, my problem is that there's really nothing to be gained from trying to act all tough after the fact, which is exactly what we saw from both their manager and relief pitcher, who, if I'm not mistaken, did draw a 3-game suspension for his actions. And Rob, you've been around the game a whole lot longer than I have, so that's just what I think. But what's your take on all this?
Well, as a kid who grew up on Wii Baseball, I'm very glad you decided to go that route with your analogy. But all jokes aside, I think you said it best. Tatis's slam once again brings us back to some of these talks about the antiquated, unwritten rules of the game and how they seem to be getting slowly phased out of this next generation of ball players. Players bat flipping after home runs or pitchers getting fired up after a big strikeout used to be frowned upon only a couple of decades ago, but this new wave of youth driving the game forward has truly shaken up how sportsmanship is viewed in baseball. So personally, I had no problem with Tatis, and I think if Major League Baseball wishes to attract the next generation of sports fans and be competitive with the likes of the more modernized and subsequently more popular NFL and NBA, they need to start embracing this idea of more excitement and emotion in their game. As a player myself, if I make a big play or step up in a huge situation, like I'm going to get fired up. I'm going to play it up with my teammates. I just want to have a good time out there and play the game. So this idea of letting the kids play, as many MLB fans have started to say over the past years, I think is only going to get more traction and will eventually be a bit of the norm, hopefully, in the next few years.
Yeah, and I think it is also important to acknowledge that we do still have these unwritten rules in sports other than baseball. You obviously see, whether it's college basketball or the NBA, actually, dribbling out the clock is common practice in an insurmountable lead in the fourth quarter, especially once the shot clock is down beneath 30 or 24 seconds. But I don't know, maybe I'm biased just coming from a basketball background, but this baseball one, it just strikes me the wrong way because like 7 runs, yeah, again, extremely unlikely that you're going to come back, but who's to say it's not going to happen? It has happened before, right? So I guess I just don't fully understand that aspect of it, but definitely there are two sides to the argument. I'm not going to argue with that.
Oh, of course. And, me arguing for baseball kind of doing away with some of these older rules is by no means an attack on, good-hearted, genuine sportsmanship. I'm not going out and saying, play like a jerk and disrespect your opponents. But, I think it's a little different with baseball because you can't run out the clock like you can in basketball and football. You need to attack every batter and get outs. And so no matter how big your lead is, you're always looking to stretch it because, God forbid, pitcher comes in, he walks a few guys, gives up a few hits, there's a few runs, and then boom, all of a sudden the next batter hits a grand slam or a 3-run homer, and all of a sudden an 8-run lead is down to a 2-run lead. So I think in baseball it's a little different. And quick side note about the Padres, they've certainly exacted their revenge over the next few games since the Tatis incident. They hit 4 grand slams in a row in 4 games. So each game they had a grand slam, including a walk-off grand slam from Manny Machado, the third baseman. And I love to see MLB Twitter react to that, saying that, he was being disrespectful. He should have hit a walk-off single. A grand slam is too many runs to win a game on. So the MLB community has a good sense of humor, which I'm glad to see. But another fiery incident in baseball, and I love what's happening. I think the game needs more emotion and excitement like that if they want to remain competitive in the American sports scene.
And surely it will be an emotional matchup between me and Rob next time we do play Wii Baseball. So let's move now into assists, fumbles, and what to watch for as our last segment. My assist of the week actually has to go to Dallas Mavericks center Boban Marjanovic, simply for being the nicest guy in the NBA, according to LA Clippers forward Marcus Morris. During a stoppage in Game 2 of the Clippers-Mavericks series, Morris, who's known for being one of sort of the tough guys in the league, he leaned over and he told Boban, "You're the nicest guy I've ever met. You're my guy." Indeed, Boban had been both mic'd up and interviewed by the TNT crew during these playoffs, and it would seem that he is, in fact, a big friendly giant. And there's definitely a lot of heart in that 7'4" man, assuming Morris wasn't simply trying to gain any sort of competitive edge.
I don't think he was. I think he genuinely appreciates how nice of a guy Boban is, and I think his appreciation goes past the players. I think it's even more so with the fans. I think Boban is at least a top 3 most beloved player in the league, maybe behind Taco Fall and Alex Caruso, but that's an argument for another day. As my assist of the week goes to another very nice guy, and that's Pau Gasol, the 20-year NBA veteran of the Grizzlies, Chicago Bulls, Los Angeles Lakers, San Antonio Spurs. As he this past week joined Vanessa Bryant, the wife of the late great Kobe Bryant, and her children for a nice afternoon on the water, which generated a very heartwarming picture of Gasol on a boat smiling while holding Kobe's young daughter Bianca, who's 2 years old, also grinning ear to ear. And I think Uncle Pau, as they now call him, is honoring Kobe's legacy in perhaps the best way possible by being a dear friend to his wife and kids and really providing the emotional support necessary to that family.
Yeah, it was definitely a warm moment from Pau Gasol, and I've enjoyed, monitoring the internet chatter on this, and I think people are right. I think that Kobe and Vanessa's children, they will grow up, and Uncle Pau is sort of going to be the guy that they ask about stories about their dad. And again, it's so tragic what happened to him, but I think that, yeah, Pau Gasol is the ideal candidate to sort of carry out Kobe's legacy and keep an eye on his daughters while he's at it. I think also it's worth noting that Michael Jordan didn't have too many friends on his Chicago Bulls, whereas by all accounts, Kobe Bryant and Pau Gasol were inseparable at times. You saw them always speaking Spanish out there on the court. Really, they were a formidable duo both on and off. So I do love to see that friendship persisting even in the aftermath of the tragedy back in January. So my fumble of the week actually goes to the New York Knicks for something that is not even in their own control. During last night's NBA draft lottery, the Knicks, who were likely to end up with at least the number 6 pick, somehow fell to number 8 in what most considered to be an extremely top-heavy draft. So NBA players De'Aaron Fox and Enes Kanter were among those clowning the Knicks on social media afterward. So for years, we have gotten the sense that if something can go wrong with that team, it will. And last night was, unfortunately for Knicks fans, no exception.
Yeah, and I'm a Chicago Bulls fan myself, so I was, of course, happy with the fact that we moved up to number 4 last night. But I'm certainly no cheerleader for the New York Knicks. There's a pretty bad history of the Bulls just wrecking the Knicks with Michael Jordan every year. But I can't help but feel sorry for Knicks fans. It seems like they just can't catch a break, even in being bad and getting a very good pick. They somehow just can't do anything with that. So the way I see it, I like Tom Thibodeau. It's a good hire. I think it's a safe hire for that team. I don't know how good he is at developing young talent, but he seemed to have coached those young Chicago Bulls teams with Derrick Rose and Joakim Noah pretty well until Rose went down. But I think the Knicks' success in the long term starts and ends with James Dolan. And as long as he's still there, I really don't see that team doing much of anything, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So my fumble of this week goes to Bucks guard Chris Middleton, whose performance over his last 2 games has been one to forget. Across the first 2 contests against the Orlando Magic, Middleton, who is in the midst of a 5-year, $178 million deal, scored just 16 points on 25% shooting from the field and 20% from behind the arc. This including just 2 points in a Game 2 win on 1 of 8 shooting and 0-4 from 3. And while it looks like the Bucks have rebounded from their abysmal Game 1 start, a guy like Middleton with larger responsibilities on that team and an even larger contract needs to step up if Milwaukee looks to compete with the class of the Eastern Conferences. Aidan, your Celtics and the Toronto Raptors look to be really serious contenders.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm not too worried about Middleton. I'm a big Middleton believer. You know, he came just short, I think, of being a 50, 40, 90 player. And I think that he is the perfect complementary piece to Giannis when it's all said and done. And I really don't mind the Bucks giving him that 178 million, although I will say probably no other team would have sort of had the guts to do so. But yeah, I think definitely he could use a bounce back performance in Game 3. And you're right, Rob, they are going to need him moving forward. So lastly, I got to give my what to watch for to the Hockey East Association and the Atlantic Hockey Association, of which the Holy Cross women's and men's hockey teams are respective members. With athletes returning to campus this week, it feels like a decision on the fate of hockey is sort of looming or on the horizon. And for the women's team, the Hockey East Conference has announced its intent to play the 2020-2021 season, although no official start date has been set. And as for the men, the Atlantic Hockey Association has not yet released its plan for the upcoming season. And it seems safe to say at this point that neither league will begin play as early as we have become accustomed to. So fingers crossed for a decision being reached probably this week or next on the upcoming hockey season in college.
So last week, I talked about golf, and this week I'm going to show a little love to soccer fans in my event to watch for as the UEFA Champions League final kicks off this Sunday, featuring 2 of Europe's elite squads. Paris Saint-Germain looks to capture their first ever Champions League title as the German giant Bayern Munich aims for UEFA Championship number 6 in their storied history. And while I'm certainly not an avid fan of soccer, global events like these, the Champions League, the World Cup finals, bringing Earth's greatest players together on the biggest stage is more than enough to curb my appetite for sports as they rightfully return in this age of coronavirus.
And how about that? Rob Murray giving a shout out to the soccer fans of the world on the podcast.
I know. I didn't think I'd do it, but I just felt something today that really made me want to talk about soccer and show some love to our soccer fans out there.
Yeah, well, with that, that's going to be it for episode 4 of the WCHC Sports Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in, and please don't forget to let us know what you'd like to hear us talk about during episode 5, which we'll have for you same time next week. Until next time.